Picture this moment frozen in time. A warrior stands proud on his fortress wall, 30 meters above the ground. His shield is oak reinforced with iron bands. His armor is layered leather and metal rings, crafted over months by the finest smiths. Around him, his brothers in arms mock the distant Roman camp. They are safe, untouchable. The enemies are too far for arrows, too distant for spears. Then comes the sound. Not the whisper of an arrow, not the crack of a sling stone. This is different. This is a scream of tortured air, a sound that doesn't belong in the natural world. The warrior has half a second to turn his head, half a second to see the dark shape hurtling toward him at speeds no human hand could achieve. Half a second to realize that everything he believed about walls and distance and safety was a lie. The impact arrives like divine judgment. The 30-kilogram stone projectile doesn't just hit him, it erases him. His shield explodes into splinters. His armor becomes confetti. His body transforms into a red mist, flung backward 10 meters across the rampart. The Merlin he stood behind shatters, sending knife-sharp stone fragments scything through his comrades like invisible blades. 5 men die in an instant. 5 families destroyed by a single mathematical calculation made 800 meters away by a man they never saw. This wasn't war as humanity had known it for 10,000 years. This was industrial-scale execution. This was physics weaponized. This was Rome. And the machine that delivered this terror? It had a name that would echo through history, striking fear into every civilization that heard it. The ballista, the shield destroyer, the city breaker. The fist of Jupiter made manifest in wood and twisted sinew. Today, we're going to dissect how a weapon designed by a paranoid Greek tyrant became the master key that unlocked the ancient world. We'll witness its evolution from prototype to perfection, trace its journey from Syracuse to Constantinople, and watch as it transforms warfare from a contest of courage into a science of systematic slaughter. This is the story of the precision killers. This is the autopsy of Rome's ultimate advantage. This is how engineering conquered empires. The ballista's origin story begins not with Rome, but with terror. Syracuse, 399 BC. The most beautiful Greek city in Sicily, a jewel of marble and philosophy, ruled by a man consumed by paranoia. Dionysius I wasn't a philosopher king. He was a tyrant who trusted absolutely no one. Historical accounts tell us he forced his own daughters to shave him using only dull bronze razors, fearful they might slit his throat with a sharp blade. He constructed a prison inside a limestone cave with such perfect acoustics that he could eavesdrop on his enemies' whispered conspiracies from his palace above. But Dionysius had good reason for his paranoia. Across the Mediterranean, a shadow was growing. Carthage, the ancient Phoenician superpower, didn't just want to trade with Sicily. They wanted to consume it. Their armies had already razed other Greek cities on the island, leaving behind stories of massacres that froze men's blood. The Carthaginians commanded vast fleets, limitless manpower, and the patience to starve a city into submission. They were coming for Syracuse, coming for Dionysius. The tyrant examined his defenses. The walls were formidable. His hoplite soldiers were brave and well-trained. But courage and stone wouldn't be enough against Carthaginian siege expertise. Dionysius understood a fundamental truth that most leaders miss. You cannot win a fair fight against a superior enemy. So he decided to make the fight unfair. He issued a call across the entire Greek world. Bring me your brightest mathematicians, your most innovative engineers, your master carpenters and metallurgists. Bring me genius, and I will give you gold, protection, and a challenge worthy of your brilliance. Create me a weapon no one can imagine. Build me an arrow that pierces shield and man alike. Design me something that can sink warships from my walls. They came, drawn by wealth, by intellectual challenge, by the sheer audacity of the project. They worked in secret workshops at the port, guarded by the tyrant's personal soldiers. The pressure was absolute. Success meant glory and riches. Failure meant disappearing into that cave prison where Dionysius listened to screams. The early attempts followed predictable paths. They tried building larger composite bows, scaling up the traditional weapon. But wood and horn have physical limits. Beyond a certain draw weight, they simply fracture. The material fails before the energy increases. They had reached a dead end. Then, one engineer, his name lost to history, had the breakthrough that would change warfare forever. He was examining a piece of rope when the revelation struck. What if the power source wasn't a bent wooden arm at all? What if it came from twisting, from torsion? What if you could store energy by winding bundles of sinew into impossible tension? They built the first prototype using wooden frames reinforced with bronze plates. They inserted skeins of ox sinew, thousands of individual strands combed and aligned. Using massive levers, they began to twist these skeins. The tension built to levels that would shatter any bow. The wooden frame groaned and vibrated as if containing a violent spirit desperate to escape. They attached throwing arms to these torsion springs, connected a drawstring, and loaded not an arrow, but a short, heavy, iron-tipped bolt. They called it the catapelticon, the shield piercer. The first test firing brought complete silence to the workshop. 10 men sweated to crank the levers, winding the torsion springs to maximum tension. The chief engineer gave the order. The release mechanism triggered. The sound wasn't a twang. It was an explosion, a crack that shook the ground and stopped hearts. The meter-long iron bolt crossed the 100-meter test range in a blur. It pierced the first practice shield, then the second, then the third. It embedded so deep into the stone wall that they needed hammers and chisels to extract it. For the first time in years, the tyrant smiled. Dionysius finally possessed the advantage he needed. He unleashed his new weapons at the siege of Massilia against the Carthaginians. It was systematic slaughter. The defenders, accustomed to arrows that fell weakly against their walls, watched their comrades pierced through bronze armor. They saw men killed at distances they considered absolutely safe. The psychological impact exceeded the physical destruction. Terror became Dionysius's most valuable ally. The secret, of course, couldn't be contained. The idea was too powerful. It spread like fire through the Greek world. Philip II of Macedon adopted and refined the technology, making it mobile for field armies. His son Alexander carried these machines to the edges of the known world, using them against Darius's Persians and the war elephants of India. But the Greek weapons, for all their brilliance, remained temperamental. Sinew ropes were sensitive to moisture. Rain or even heavy dew could loosen the tension, requiring expert maintenance. They were weapons of genius for genius operators. But geniuses don't build empires that last a millennium. Practical, systematic engineers do. And when the knowledge reached the emerging power in Italy, when it fell into the hands of a republic of farmers and soldiers obsessed with standardization and logistics, everything changed. The Romans didn't just copy the Greek katapeltikon. They dissected it, stripped away the mysticism, and rebuilt it in their own image. Stronger, simpler, more reliable, and above all, designed for mass production. The Roman ballista was about to be born, and warfare would never be the same. What separates genius from greatness? The Greeks created a brilliant weapon. The Romans created a system. When Roman engineers first examined captured Greek artillery, they didn't admire it as art. They measured every component, weighed every part, and identified every weakness. The Greek approach was lightning, brilliant and unpredictable. The Roman approach was an earthquake, methodical and inevitable. The first Roman innovation was brutal in its simplicity. Where Greeks relied primarily on wood, Romans added metal, lots of metal. The torsion frames, the heart of the machine, began to be forged from cast bronze or reinforced with thick iron plates. This wasn't just about durability. Metal frames could withstand far greater torsion than wood. More torsion meant more stored energy. More energy meant more range, more penetration, more death. But the true revolution wasn't in the materials. It was in the philosophy. The Romans invented standardization. Every ballista component in the 10th Legion stationed in Gaul was identical to those in the 3rd Legion in Egypt. The metal bolts, the bronze washers, the gear assemblies, everything followed exact specifications kept in Rome's central archives. Consider what this meant on the battlefield. When a wooden throwing arm shattered from enemy counterfire, there was no panic. No need to summon a master craftsman from Athens. A legion carpenter simply retrieved an identical replacement from the supply wagons, fitted it into the bronze frame, retensioned the ropes, and within 15 minutes, the machine was killing again. The Greeks invented the weapon. Rome invented the logistics of death. Then there was the human element. The ballistarius wasn't some brute handed a complex task. He was elite, a specialist who trained for years. He understood angles, wind, ballistics, torsion physics. While defenders prayed to their gods, the ballistarius prayed to mathematics. He used graduated sighting scales, adjusted elevation with precision mechanisms, calculated wind drift and distance. He didn't fire at the wall. He fired at the 3rd crenellation left of the main tower. He fired at the officer giving orders. He fired at the cauldron of boiling oil before defenders could tip it onto Roman sappers below. This transformed siege psychology completely. Walls had always been refuge, places of safety. Now they became killing grounds. Defenders learned not to expose themselves. They learned that silence in the Roman camp was more terrifying than battle cries. Silence meant the engineers were calculating. Silence meant the Scorpio, the smaller, faster, deadlier version of the ballista, already had your name. The Scorpio deserves special mention. If the ballista was a precision rifle, the Scorpio was a sniper weapon. Operated by 1 or 2 men, firing a 70-centimeter iron bolt with terrifying accuracy at 400 meters. Its purpose was high-value target elimination. See that man in the decorated helmet giving orders? Crack. The bolt pierces his throat. See those defenders trying to extinguish fire in the wooden siege tower. Crack, crack, crack. 3 shots in 30 seconds. 3 men falling from the walls. Rome had transformed artillery from siege weapon into tactical instrument. But it took one man, one campaign, to demonstrate the absolute peak of what these machines could achieve. A man whose ambition was as cold and precise as the weapons he wielded. Gaius Julius Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Gaul in 58 BC, he brought 60,000 legionaries. But more importantly, he brought his artillery train. The Gauls, fierce warriors who lived for close combat, had no concept of what was coming. They weren't about to fight a man. They were about to fight a system. Avaricum, 52 BC. The heart of Gaul. A fortress considered impregnable by its defenders. Vercingetorix, the charismatic leader of the Gallic rebellion, had implemented a scorched earth strategy. Burn every village, every grain store, starve the Roman legions into retreat. But the people of Avaricum begged him to spare their city. It was the most beautiful in Gaul, they pleaded. Its walls were an engineering marvel, alternating layers of massive timber beams and solid stone. The wood absorbed battering ram impacts. The stone resisted fire. It was a flexible, unbreakable fortress. Vercingetorix, against his better judgment, relented. Caesar arrived and assessed the situation. Walls that seemed impossibly high. A swamp protecting one flank, a river the other. 30,000 Gallic warriors on the battlements, shouting insults, absolutely confident in their invincibility. The Roman legions were exhausted, hungry, morale low from winter campaigning and lack of supplies. Any rational general would have moved on, would have judged the city too costly to take. But Caesar couldn't show weakness, couldn't allow Vercingetorix's rebellion a single symbol of hope. Avaricum wasn't just a military target, it was a message. And Caesar specialized in messages, written in blood and mathematics. He ordered his engineers, led by Titus Labienus, to do the impossible. In the middle of Gallic winter, under constant freezing rain and Gallic attacks, build 2 siege ramps, 2 artificial mountains of earth and timber, constructed day and night, stretching toward the walls, hundreds of meters long, 25 meters high. The Gauls laughed at first. From their walls, they launched fire arrows, hurled stones, organized night raids to burn the construction. But they weren't met with swords. They were met with the whistle. Caesar didn't wait for the ramps to be completed. From day one, he deployed his artillery. Dozens of heavy ballistae, machines that launched 30-kilogram stones, positioned in strategic emplacements. Their mission wasn't to knock down the walls. That was impossible from that distance. Their mission was suppression, clearing, area denial. Every time a group of Gallic warriors gathered on a wall section to shoot arrows or throw javelins, the ballistarius received targeting data. The calculations were made. The final tensioning completed. The release. A 30-kilogram rock flew 800 meters and crashed into the stone merlin, not just killing the warrior group, but tearing away part of the wall itself. The terror was immediate and total. The Gauls learned that clustering meant death. For 25 days, under rain and sleet, the legionaries built. And for 25 days, Caesar's artillery sang its song of precision death. It kept the walls clean. It kept defenders crouched in terror, unable to organize coherent resistance against the slow, monstrous advance of the earthen ramps. The ballista wasn't just a weapon. It was an instrument of psychological torture. It was the constant reminder, every hour of every day, that Romans could reach out and touch you, but you couldn't touch them. It was the fundamental unfairness of technological warfare. When the ramps finally reached the walls, when the siege towers with artillery mounted on top rolled forward, the Gauls were already broken in spirit. The final assault was brutal hand-to-hand combat, but the victory had been secured weeks earlier by wood, sinew, and mathematics. Caesar recorded it in his commentaries with characteristic coldness. Of 40,000 inhabitants of Avaricum, only 800 survived. It was a massacre designed by engineers, executed by machines, and guaranteed by systematic Roman doctrine. The ballista had become Caesar's hammer. With it, he crushed Gaul. But Caesar himself was becoming a problem for Rome. His power, his popularity, his loyal legions were too great. The Senate, terrified of what he might do, gave him an ultimatum. Disband your army and return to Rome as a private citizen, or be declared an enemy of the state. Caesar stood on the banks of a small river called the Rubicon. He knew that crossing meant civil war, Roman against Roman, legionary against legionary. And for the first time in history, the ballista wouldn't aim at barbarians. It would aim at brothers. 49 BC. The Roman Republic was a corpse, and its sons fought over the remains. Massilia, present-day Marseille, a wealthy Greek-founded city and Rome's ally for centuries, made a catastrophic mistake. They closed their gates to Julius Caesar. They chose Pompey's side in the Civil War. Caesar couldn't allow such a powerful naval fortress at his back while marching to Hispania. But the siege of Massilia would be unlike anything he'd faced before. The Gauls had been brave, but technologically inferior. The Massiliates were experts, descendants of the same Greeks who invented torsion artillery. For the first time in history, the Roman ballista faced its own reflection. Caesar's engineers, veterans hardened in Gallic mud, looked across their siege lines and saw on Massilia's walls not painted barbarians, but their own machines. Ballistae, catapults, scorpions, all perfectly maintained and operated by engineers who understood every secret of torsion mechanics as well as they did. The most terrifying artillery duel the ancient world had ever witnessed began. The ballistarius of the 10th Legion, accustomed to being the hunter, was now prey. The whistle tearing the air could be his or the enemy's. It was a deadly lottery of physics and precision, a game of centimeters at 800 meters. Caesar ordered construction of siege towers, ramps, vinea, mobile sheds to protect men digging tunnels or operating battering rams. Massilia's response was devastating. Their heavy ballistae didn't aim at individual legionaries. They targeted Caesar's siege engines. A single 40-kilogram stone could splinter a 15-meter siege tower. Their scorpions swept the field, killing Roman carpenters attempting repairs. They launched incendiary projectiles, pots of boiling pitch and oil. It was active, intelligent, lethal defense. Caesar's men stalled. Fear gripped the camp. The weapon that always guaranteed victory had found a lock it couldn't open. Caesar's genius wasn't purely military. It was psychological. Seeing his men faltering, seeing enemy technical superiority breaking their morale, he did what he always did: doubled down. He ordered something that sounded like madness. Don't just match the enemy machines, surpass them, right there on the battlefield. A frantic arms race began. Caesar's engineers, working under constant fire, built new, larger, more powerful ballistae, with thicker bronze frames capable of withstanding torsion that would burst any Greek machine. They created monsters launching 60-kilogram projectiles. Then, Caesar changed tactics entirely. No more precision dueling. This became demolition by saturation. He selected one tower on Massilia's wall, a critical defensive strongpoint, and ordered all heavy artillery to concentrate fire on it. 10, 15 ballistae firing in unison. Not at the crenellations, not at the men, but at the same structural point at the tower's base. Again and again. The sound was continuous thunder. Pulverized stone dust covered the sky like fog. Massilia's defenders could do nothing. Their machines were lethal, but distributed across the entire wall perimeter. They couldn't match that concentration of destructive power on a single point. For days, the tower trembled. Massilian engineers tried repairing from inside, working frantically. Useless. Stone struck 1,000 times loses structural integrity. Physics is relentless and unforgiving. The tower didn't collapse with dramatic flair. It simply surrendered, becoming a cascade of rubble, taking defenders and their machines into the void. A massive breach had opened in the impregnable fortress. The psychological impact exceeded physical damage. Caesar had won the engineering duel against masters of the craft. He'd demonstrated that his will and resources were infinite. The city, broken and starving, surrendered. The ballista had crowned Caesar emperor in all but name. It had won the Civil War. And in the following decades, under Emperor Augustus, it became the symbol of imperial power across the known world. Every legion on every frontier, from Hadrian's Wall in misty Britannia to the desert sands of Syria, maintained its artillery detachment. It was the emperor's long arm, the guarantee of Pax Romana, the promise that rebellion would be crushed with mathematical precision. But empires, like machines, age, and the perfect weapon that built Rome's dominion would slowly, tragically, become irrelevant. 2nd century AD, the empire at its zenith. Pax Romana, the Roman peace, stretches from Scotland to Egypt, but peace is the worst enemy of military innovation. The ballista, Caesar's hammer, the wall breaker, now sits silent. It has become a watchdog. Atop Hadrian's vast wall in misty Britannia, sentries look toward northern forests, their only company a Scorpio covered with tarp to protect from eternal rain. On the Rhine and Danube frontiers, legions patrol from stone fortresses. Each fortress maintains its artillery complement. The ballistae are there, polished, maintained, ready. But ready for what? They fire occasionally, not to knock down walls, to impress. When Germanic raiders approach too close to the river, a single shot sends a 30-kilogram rock flying 700 meters. The message is clear: stay away. The weapon of conquest has become a crowd control tool, a piece of geopolitical theater. Engineers continue training, but it's repetition, not innovation. The great sieges are over. The known world is conquered. And then, the world starts hitting back. 251 AD, Battle of Abritus. A Roman emperor, Decius, isn't besieging a city. The enemy isn't behind walls. The enemy is mobile, fast, a horse horde that appears, attacks supply lines, and vanishes. Where are the ballistae? They're 300 kilometers away in river fortresses. Too heavy. They would take weeks to dismantle, load onto ox carts, transport. By the time artillery reached the battlefield, the Goths would be back across the Danube with the gold of 3 provinces. Emperor Decius and his son die in a swamp. It's a disaster, a sign that the game has fundamentally changed. The empire hemorrhages economically. Galloping inflation. the legendary silver denarius becomes worthless bronze. And a ballista is expensive, incredibly expensive. The bronze frame represents a fortune in metal that could pay soldiers' wages. Sinew ropes require specialized craftsmen whose schools have closed, whose knowledge is being lost. The ballistarius, once elite engineer, is replaced by barbarian recruits barely taught to hold a spear. The Roman army is no longer Julius Caesar's professional machine. It's a desperate force trying to plug 1,000 holes simultaneously. The ballista, the precision weapon, the sniper rifle, is useless in a knife fight in a dark alley. The army doesn't need a weapon that hits a man at 800 meters. It needs something that kills 20 men at 100 meters. Needs something cheap, simple, fast. And so, ironically, the remaining Roman engineers, last vestiges of a dying genius, unearth an older, simpler, stupider design. The onager, a giant wooden arm tensioned with torsion, smashing against a stop, launching a huge rock in a high arc. No precision, no elegance. Its only purpose, throw the biggest possible stone toward the enemy and hope it hits something. It's a thug's weapon, not a surgeon's. The ballista disappears from Western European battlefields. Its complexity has become its death sentence. Knowledge fades. Engineering texts become arcane manuscripts nobody can read. When Alaric and his Goths stand before Rome's Aurelian gates in 410 AD, they bring no siege machines. They don't need them. Someone opens the gates from inside. The city that used engineering to conquer the world falls through political collapse. But the idea of the ballista, the concept of torsion, the physics of long-distance precision death, that idea is too powerful to die completely. The Western Empire turned to dust. But in the East, in fabulous, wealthy Constantinople, the second Rome, the empire continued. And its engineers, heirs of Dionysius and Caesar, looked at old manuscripts and saw not just history, but potential. Constantinople wasn't Rome. It was an improved version. While Western Europe sank into chaos, this city shone like a diamond. It was the center of trade, faith, science, and possessed the greatest defense system human ingenuity had ever built: the Theodosian walls. A triple layer of stone, moats, towers. A 13-kilometer challenge shouting to the world, try it. For 600 years, nobody could. The Byzantine Empire didn't lose legionary knowledge. It preserved it, refined it. In city libraries, texts from Caesar's engineers and Greek mathematicians didn't rot. They were copied, studied, improved. The Byzantine ballistarius was the direct heir of that 1,000-year tradition. But the enemy had changed. From southern deserts, an unstoppable force emerged. Unified, inspired, terrifyingly intelligent. Islam. The Caliphate armies weren't savages. They were the new owners of science, having conquered Persia, Egypt, North Africa, absorbing the knowledge of ancient civilizations. In 674 AD, they reached the Theodosian walls. The Great Siege began, crescent against cross. And on those walls, the Roman ballista had its final great act. The Arabs brought hundreds of ships, brought siege machines learned from Persians. But they faced the Byzantine Scorpio. Constantinople's engineers had perfected Caesar's weapon into the chiromangana, or ballista. Smaller, faster versions made almost entirely of metal. They were the ancient world's machine guns. From marble wall towers, Byzantine gunners unleashed precision hell, not aiming at ship hulls, aiming at men, at helmsmen, at captains, at crews trying to deploy siege ramps. Surgical execution at 400 meters. But the Arabs were tenacious and intelligent. They brought a new idea. Simple, brutal, learned from the Far East. Not using sinew, not delicate torsion physics, but using men. The traction mangonel. A long arm, a sling, and at the other end, no complex mechanism. 50 men grabbing 50 ropes. When engineers shouted, 50 men pulled down with all their weight. The arm moved, launching a stone. To the proud Byzantine ballistarius, this was an insult. A stupid, imprecise, barbaric machine with none of the mathematical elegance of his ballista. The ballista was a sniper rifle. The mangonel was a sawed-off shotgun. But the mangonel had one terrifying advantage: speed. The ballistarius could fire a precision bolt every 2 minutes. The mangonel crew, sweating and shouting, could launch a rock every 30 seconds. The siege became saturation bombardment. 10, 20 mangonels launching rocks non-stop, day and night. Not aiming at individual men, aiming at wall sections. The objective wasn't to kill, it was to wear down, turn stone to dust, blow after blow after blow. The ballista, Caesar's weapon, the weapon of conquest, had been relegated to defensive role, an elite weapon trying to contain a brute force tide. The Byzantines survived, not just through machines, but through their ultimate secret weapon: Greek fire, that infernal liquid that burned on water. But the world had seen the future. The ballista was too complicated, required too rare materials, too much specialized knowledge. The traction mangonel? Anyone could build one with wood, ropes, and expendable bodies. And while the mangonel dominated battlefields, somewhere, some anonymous engineer, perhaps in China, perhaps in Persia, looked at those 50 men pulling ropes and had an idea. An idea that would make even the ballista seem like a child's toy. What if you replaced those 50 men with a single 10,000-kilogram stone block? The torsion era was ending. The counterweight era was about to be born. The weapon that built the Roman Empire was becoming obsolete. A new monster was coming to knock down its walls. The year 1204, the Fourth Crusade. An army of Christian knights, Venetians, French, supposedly marching to liberate the Holy Land. They looked at Constantinople's walls and decided that sacking their Christian brothers would be easier. On their ships, they brought new machines, trebuchets. The counterweight trebuchet was the antithesis of everything the ballista represented. The ballista was a Stradivarius violin, precise, delicate, a masterpiece of tension and mathematics. The trebuchet was an iron anvil falling from a cliff. It didn't use sinew, it used gravity, the most relentless force in the universe. A 15-meter wooden arm. One end held a sling with the projectile. The other end had a giant wooden box that engineers filled with 10, 15, sometimes 20,000 kilos of lead, sand, stones. The crew didn't need elite engineers. They simply winched the arm down, raising the counterweight box. The process took half an hour of mechanical creaking. When ready, a single man with a mallet struck the release pin. 20,000 kilos fell. The wooden arm moved at speeds that defied its size. The sling launched 200-kilogram rocks. But they didn't fly straight. They flew high, in lazy arcs over the walls. They didn't aim at men, they aimed at the city itself. The projectile fell from the sky, not crashing into a building, but piercing it, through the roof, through the second floor, through the first floor, buried in the basement, killing everyone inside. It was terror bombardment, the precursor to modern artillery. And what did they launch? Not just stones. They launched rotting bodies of horses and cows to spread disease. Launched severed heads of prisoners to break morale. Launched messages wrapped around rocks. The ballista was dead. Its era was over, crushed under the relentless power of simple gravity. But wait, the weapon that conquered the world, killed by something as basic as a falling weight? The idea of the ballista didn't die completely. It hid. It transformed. Medieval engineers looked at the Roman manuballista, the handheld Scorpio, and combined it with a simple bow. They took the trigger mechanism, replaced the torsion with a short, thick steel bow. They called it the crossbow. The crossbow was the ghost of the ballista, Caesar's spirit in a mercenary's hands. A weapon held by one man that could pierce plate armor and kill a noble knight at 200 meters. A weapon so terrifyingly effective, so fundamentally unfair, that Pope Innocent II tried to ban it in 1139, declaring it hateful to God. It didn't work. Roman precision was back, more lethal than ever. But even the reign of trebuchets and crossbows was short-lived, because in secret alchemist workshops in China, a new mixture was waiting. Sulfur, charcoal, saltpeter. A mixture that depended on neither torsion nor gravity. A mixture that depended on fire. The year 1453. Constantinople again. The last act. A young Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, obsessed with taking the city. The Theodosian walls had resisted 1,000 years of siege. They would not fall to trebuchets. Mehmed needed something new. He brought in a Hungarian engineer named Urban and commissioned the largest weapon the world had ever seen. Not a ballista, a cannon. The Great Turkish Bombard, 8 meters long, a mouth so wide a man could fit inside. It fired 600-kilogram stone balls. The last Romans, led by Emperor Constantine XI, prepared. They had their own ballistae, crossbows, trebuchets, Greek fire. 1,000 years of defensive engineering on their side. May 29th, the cannons opened fire. The sound wasn't a whistle or a groan. It was the roar of the end of the world. A 600-kilogram stone ball struck the Theodosian wall, the largest structure in Christendom. The wall simply evaporated, turned to dust. The ballista, the weapon that defined 1,500 years of warfare, ended its history not in heroic battle, but as a silent spectator, a fossil on a wall, watching as new physics, as gunpowder and chemistry, made it irrelevant forever. The ballista was more than wood and sinew. It was an idea. The idea that mind could kill more efficiently than muscle. The idea that engineering was the true power. It was the fist of Rome, the hammer that forged an empire from the Atlantic to Mesopotamia. And its history is our reminder. Every impregnable wall, every perfect defense, somewhere has an engineer designing the exact key to bring it down. The game never ends. It only changes rules. From Dionysius's paranoid workshops, to Caesar's systematic slaughter, to Constantinople's final stand, the ballista taught humanity a lesson we've never forgotten. Technological advantage is temporary, but the principle is eternal. Victory belongs to those who can calculate, innovate, and industrialize death faster than their enemies can adapt. The whistle has faded. The machines have crumbled to dust. But the idea? The idea of precision killing at distance through engineering brilliance? That idea is immortal. It lives on in every guided missile, every sniper rifle, every drone strike. The ballista is dead. Long live the ballista.